Hello, everyone, and welcome to the One Kill Part Podcast. Episode 309. I'm Benjamin Yoder, here today, back from Japan. Welcome. Hope you enjoyed all that Monolith Soft talk while I was gone. You know, it's funny. I was like, oh, I should trust myself more in the last podcast. And then in the time before I left Japan, I watched all of Xenosaga Episode 3's story. And my memory of the end of that game is completely different than what the end of that game actually is. So I thought that was kind of funny. I was like, I need to trust myself more. And then meanwhile, my memory was completely botched on the end of Xenosaga Episode 3. So we're not talking about Xenosaga this week, though. I'll save you guys from too much Monolith Soft talk this week. And honestly, we got a lot to talk about. You know, it's been a few weeks since we really touched on news. I actually played a good chunk of games, including some stuff in Japan, and a few games before I left Japan. I think the ones before I left Japan, I think I'll probably spend the most time on today at the very least. So, I mean, just to give you a little rundown of what I think is probably going to happen. So I played 2 arcade games when I was in Japan, which was Chase Jokers and Dragon Quest Crossblade. And I think I'm going to talk about those probably either in their own separate videos or in a separate stream where I go over my Japan adventure stuff, I think is what's going to happen. I don't know for sure, but that is my current guess of what I'm going to end up doing. So just as a heads up on that, that is probably what's going to happen for generally most of the Japan stuff. I won't like stop myself if there's like something relevant to what I want to say today about that Japan trip and like what we're talking about today. But I think that's going to be saved for a separate thing probably. I haven't really done any like strong planning yet for that. So if those plans change, I guess there's a chance that those plans will change kind of thing. So anyway, so what we're going to be talking about today is a few different things. One, I played through Splatoon 2. Also, Luminous Avengers Gunvolt X2 as well. So we're going to go over those. I don't really have like a ton of thoughts on those, I don't think. And so I don't really think it's worth like doing separate videos for them. So I'll just talk about those here. And then we got quite a few news stories. I mean, I imagine most of you guys probably know Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed got announced. And I'll talk about that briefly, but I haven't played it yet still. We got some Dragon Quest Champions beta results from the user feedback stuff. Some Xbox talk here, and then some interesting, more niche titles and kind of weird like Square Enix stuff too as well. So like, I feel like it's a pretty good rounded episode in terms of like my general interest generally. So, but we'll start with games first and foremost here. So before I was leaving to Japan, I had like some extra time. I kind of had pre-planned enough where I think I had like maybe around like a day to a day and a half, maybe 2 days, that I kind of didn't really have a lot going on. If you don't know, I'm still doing contract work. So like when I'm between contracts, I don't really have much going on in that time outside of, you know, the work I give myself or other things that I'm doing really. So I just kind of had some free time to just kind of do whatever. So I was like, okay, well, let me just go ahead and play through some of these games and that I've been trying to get to for a while. Splatoon 2 being a really big one. That was actually the reason I bought my Nintendo Switch, or maybe I shouldn't say the reason I bought my Nintendo Switch. I mean, generally, I think my reason for getting a Nintendo Switch is because I just like Nintendo software typically. But Splatoon 2 is kind of the pushing point of like, oh, I should pick up and play this because I was a big fan of Splatoon 1. I put like 300 hours into Splatoon 1. And then when I got Splatoon 2, I played it very, 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 very briefly and then fell off immediately. So obviously the multiplayer, I mean, I'm sure it's still alive and well. Well, maybe not well, but you know, it's still alive, and I'm sure it's being played by a number of people who have not moved to Splatoon 3 at this point at the very least. So I never really spent a lot of time with the multiplayer there, but I wanted to just at least get through the single player of that game, because I was just curious about like what had changed the campaign. I heard generally the campaign in the later Splatoon games were like a bit better, but in playing the base campaign for that game, I don't know if I necessarily agree on that. And I will say like the How Long to Beat page is like an 8-hour campaign, which for me it was probably like 3 to 4 hours. But yeah, I mean, I think the big problem I have with Splatoon 2's campaign is that it just does not really feel, I think visually it feels maybe a bit more diverse than the original Splatoon, but it just feels kind of like a, And it kind of has the thing that the Splatoon 1 had where it's like a tutorial for how to play the game. And obviously Splatoon 2 and the Splatoon series in general is more of a competitive series than anything else. And playing online is the focus, right? But it does kind of feel like the story is something that they've been trying to make more important because people seem to really embrace the characters of those games a lot. Or at least that's the impression I have gotten from the outside. And so I feel like, they have this story about, I think her name's Marie. Which one? Whatever. There's two squid girls in the first game that are like the idols, and there's the purple one, and then there's the green one. And the green one is like the one that like you talk to initially, and she's like, "Oh, stuff's going down. Also, my buddy Marie or Callie, whichever they are. I feel like Callie is the purple one. Callie's off and missing, so I got to figure it out and all that stuff, right?" So like it feels like story-wise they're doing something, which I mean the first game had that as well to some degree. But it feels like they want these characters to matter more, but then you play the story content and it feels like a tutorial still for most of it. Which I think that is the intention from the design perspective kind of thing. So I'm going to guess like maybe the Octo expansion might be better about that because, they're not introducing you to, if you're playing the Octo expansion, chances are you've already played Splatoon 2, right? I don't think you can just buy the Octo expansion as like its own separate thing like Torna or something like that. I think you need to have Splatoon 2 and somewhat likely chance that you will need to play the campaign to get to the Splatoon Octo expansion campaign. I don't know for sure on that or whatever, but yeah, so like there could be a chance that DLC like improves that, and I have been considering maybe picking up the DLC and seeing if it does. But I did go look at gameplay of Splatoon 3, and I felt like the story mode kind of had the same problem with that, where it just felt like it didn't feel like it was like a substantial campaign on its own that felt more distinct than like a tutorial thing. From my brief looking at Splatoon 3, I've not played Splatoon 3. Maybe it feels differently, right? But that was just like my brief impressions. And I also feel like that the world of the Splatoon story mode always feels kind of like sterile in a lot of ways because like the multiplayer maps feel like they're in an environment and they feel like they are things that exists in a place, right? And I feel like to some degree you might be able to like also pull some story stuff out of that to some extent. But the single player campaigns always just feel like these weird floating environments in a void that don't really exist in any real world location. Occasionally there's some maps that are not that, but most of the time it's that. And I think that is, as when I looked at Splatoon 3, that was also the case there. And I was kind of like, I kind of wish that this game felt like it had a more substantial single-player campaign. Again, that's not what's like selling that game, though, so I'm not saying that is like a requirement of them to make the game better. It's just like what I would prefer at this point. So yeah, I think, in playing that, when it comes to multiplayer, I put 300 hours into Splatoon 1. I don't think there's anything Splatoon 2 or Splatoon 3 that are going to make me re-engage with that game for an extended period of time, right? It's the problem I have with like Apex as well, where like I enjoy playing Apex still, but like I don't feel satisfied playing Apex, and I think I would enjoy playing Splatoon 2 or 3 multiplayer, but I would not feel satisfied by it, in my opinion. And I don't think I'm really willing to spend like full retail price to check out the Splatoon 3 campaign on its own, especially looking at it and being like, this feels like kind of the same kind of thing. So I don't know, maybe I'll get to the Octo expansion, but I never bought it. So at this point, unless there's something that really pushes me over the edge, this might be the end of my Splatoon experience, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? This is a franchise that at this point is like almost a decade old, I think, or we're getting close to it. So it's not like, the spry new Nintendo franchise that it used to be. I think there's a lot of expectations of what it is and what that franchise should be. And while I think people have definitely criticized Splatoon 3 for maybe not evolving that series enough, and I think in some ways Splatoon 2 never really felt like it evolved that series enough as is either. I think the question you start getting into is like, does that matter, right? Nintendo generally today feels like they're selling very consistent game experiences, And that's not a bad thing per se, right? And I feel like there's not much incentive right now for them to reinvent what Splatoon is. And Splatoon 3, I mean, I think is the best selling game in that series, right? So I think, Splatoon 3, Splatoon as a series in general, I think it's just one of those games that, like, ultimately in a lot of ways is kind of like a live service game and how it's evolving. But because it's Nintendo, it's being like sold as packaged releases in a lot of ways, right? And so it doesn't necessarily feel like, they're running like an ongoing, this is the Splatoon launcher that we support for 10 years, right? It's just coming out in kind of chunks because they can release it that way and make good profits off that. So I think in a lot of ways, I view Splatoon, even like all its sequels and stuff, as like a continuous evolving live game that definitely changes, but doesn't necessarily reinvent what it is. So I don't think personally I have much enthusiasm for the Splatoon series anymore, but again, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. So anyways, that was my experience with Splatoon 2, so a little underwhelming, but overall I'm happy I finally got around to it and that it was a bit shorter than I thought. And because it was a bit shorter than I thought, I was like, well, I have time to play another video game. So I went ahead and put in Luminous Avenger Gunvolt X2, which if you've been listening for a while, you'll know that is something I've been meaning to play for a very long time. I was going to play it earlier in the year, but then I ended up picking up Kogan instead. Kogan Sword of Rewind. And while they're definitely very different games between Kogan and Gunvolt, like, they kind of have a similar style to them. So to me, mentally, I kind of like, once I finished Kogan, I didn't really want to touch Gunvolt X2. And in general, I wasn't really very excited for X2 as a whole because, if you don't know, the Luminous Avenger series is a series focused around a side character in the Gunvolt series, which is a character named Copen. And Copen appeared in Gunvolt 2, and he has a different moveset than Gunvolt. And so his moveset is more based around like kind of dashing in the air and then tackling enemies, which marks them. And then he uses different weapons and stuff to deal damage. And, how those weapons work depend on if an enemy is marked or not. But typically you want to mark an enemy in those things. They did make some changes to how it works in terms of like, he had like this bullet system for his dashes in the past. And now that doesn't seem to really be a thing anymore. How dashes seem to kind of chain is more based around touching surfaces and also being in a powered up state. If you end up getting a high enough score, basically your companion, I forget her name, Lola, that's her name, will like sing for you and it'll give you like a buff. And there's a lot of things that you get from it. But one thing is that you get, if not infinite dashes in the air, a lot of dashes in the air for it to land and recover. So it kind of changes that formula. And Copen is kind of like Mega Man, where defeating bosses gives him different weapons and stuff, which Gunvolt doesn't really have that. Kind of. Gunvolt's weird because like he tags enemies with his weapon, and so he gets different weapons that tag enemies in different ways, but they aren't like the primary attack for Gunvolt. It is just like a way to tag enemies. So like the usefulness of the different types of weapons is very different than how like Copen or Mega Man handles that kind of thing. So really solid though game overall. But yeah, I think the big thing is that like while there were changes and there were changes I appreciated about it, I did feel like that the changes were not significant enough that I really was like, oh man, I really feel like this is a new Copen experience. And like I think part of the reason why I was okay with like the original Luminous Avengers X game, despite Copen being in Gunvolt 2 specifically, is because he was kind of a side. Well, he shared the spotlight with Gunvolt in that game, and so like it was nice that he got kind of his own full game that you could kind of use his moveset in. And I also like the story of the Luminous Avengers series quite a bit, which is like basically an alternate timeline of story for the Gunvolt series, and they play with existing lore of that franchise in fun and interesting ways. And so I think this game continues that trend. I think it generally does a pretty good job of, playing with existing characters and kind of putting them in situations that you might not really expect. But, I think maybe the novelty of it's maybe a little less this time around since the first game, I think, did it so well already. So I think the one downside I think that personally I feel is that there's a character that has a sword in the Luminous Avenger series, and that character feels like they could be their own character as a gameplay mechanic kind of thing. And I kind of was hoping that X2 specifically would bring them in, even if it wasn't like a story thing, just bring them as a playable thing, especially since Gunvolt 3 has a sword-based character as well now. But this is a different sword-based character with like different powers and stuff. So I was kind of hoping that character would get some kind of capability in the game, but unfortunately did not. So anyways, I'm still looking forward to Gunvolt 3. One thing that I did do on my Japan trip is I went ahead and picked up Gunvolt 3, and I'm very excited because that is a new character and a new moveset, and that's what I think Inti Creates does best, is create really interesting characters with movesets that really work well with the character movement, in my opinion. And, I love how characters like Gunvolt and characters like Copen are designed, but, after playing 2-3 games with them in it, I don't have as much interest in those movesets as much, so they have to really kind of go out of their way to change things. The one nice thing about like Gunvolt specifically between Gunvolt 1 and Gunvolt 2 is that Gunvolt 1's like level design was maybe a little plain, and so even though Gunvolt's moveset is very similar between those two games, how he interacts with that world is pretty different, just because the levels feel a little bit more ambitiously designed in a lot of ways. So I think it kind of worked well, and Copen being there as well was like a nice bonus on top of that too. So anyways, if they announce a Gunvolt Luminous Avenger X3 and it is just Copen again with different powers in his backpack or whatever, right? I think it's going to be a hard sell for me. I think this game was good and fine, and I think if you like the Luminous Avengers Gunvolt series, you will enjoy this game just as much. But for me personally, as someone who wants that series to evolve, I think Gunvolt 3 is going to be just kind of where I go for now. And then I guess we'll see from there. I don't really know where like Inti Creates plans to go with the Gunvolt series. If it's just going to be an ongoing thing or if they plan to wrap it up at some point or what. But I'm excited to play Gunvolt 3 eventually. Hopefully this year. I think this year would be ideal if I could. But, we'll see. I'm much more excited to play Gunvolt 3 than I was to play Luminous Avenger Gunvolt X2, but unfortunately, Luminous Avenger is the one I ended up purchasing first and foremost because it came out first. I ordered it alongside Kogan, so it showed up at like the same time. So anyways, I did play some Final Fantasy Explorers on the plane, but we're not going to talk about that. I did not finish it though, but we'll get back to it, I'm sure, eventually. Although I'm not really sure when I'm going to fit it into my life now that I'm back here. But again, Chase Jokers and Dragon Quest Crossblades, those arcade games, I'll try to do something with that. Chase Jokers I got direct footage for, so that will be helpful in making any kind of video around that. Dragon Quest Crossblades, I did not get direct footage for. I did not find a system that had capture card for. I did record a lot of off-screen gameplay I wasn't intending to really do that, but it just kind of ended up happening. So I probably could do some kind of video off of it, but I will say that the video quality itself is just not going to be great. Because, I don't have a stand or anything. I'm just holding my phone up. So, it shakes as much as my hands are shaking. It moves out of frame when I'm doing things and playing the game and it kind of veers off to the side while I'm doing something, right? So anyways, but yeah, lots of games happened and a lot of good fun. But the big thing is transitioning to news. When I was on the plane to Japan, big news happened. Big news. There you go. There's a CU podcast thing for if you don't. It's Pat Contry's podcast. Is like I think Ian or something like that. He goes big news. And then he had it on his soundboard or something like that. And then Ian always seemed annoyed by the fact that Pat would always play it, and he's like, I'd rather just say it, but whatever. Anyway, so big news happened when I was on the plane to Japan. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 DLC Wave 4, which is officially called Future Redeemed, was announced, and they're like, it's coming out next week. And I was like, cool, I'm in Japan. I do not have my Nintendo Switch with me, and honestly, even if I had my Switch with me, I would not play it there, probably. So, yeah, that was very exciting. It came out. People seem to be enjoying it. I'm a little concerned because the way people are praising it right now seem to be based around two particular things. One, which is the environment design, which I'm all for. One of the things I said in my Xenoblade Chronicles 3 video was that I feel like the world design just was not that interesting in that game. So that's a good improvement. I hope that's a something I enjoy. But also the other thing is that people seem to be enjoying how it connects all the Xenoblade Chronicles games together, at least the Xenoblade Chronicles 1, 2, and 3. I think X is referenced in there as like an Easter egg thing, but not like as a major story thing from what I hear. But I don't really know that much about it otherwise. But I will say, if you've heard me talk about Xenoblade Chronicles before, I just do not have any real attachment to Xenoblade Chronicles universe as a whole. I'm still of the mind I'd rather just the Xenoblade Chronicles franchise kind of end, and that they kind of either, ideally make a new IP, but that's not going to happen, or at least it's not going to, gonna happen at the expense of Xenoblade Chronicles. So you're gonna have Xenoblade Chronicles whatever come out next, I'm sure, or eventually come out, right? But building a trilogy of games with that trilogy in mind. I do know there's like quotes out there of them saying like, we planned Xenoblade Chronicles 2 from the start, but I will say, as somebody who played that original game and then played 2, I always kind of felt like those games did not really fit well together, and I felt like Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was really trying hard to fit itself into Xenoblade Chronicles 1. So I'm hoping that even if it was designed for that way from the start, it feels designed that way from the start when they start up a new trilogy or whatever. So anyways, but yeah, I looked at that trailer and most of the combat system looks pretty much the same, which, I will say Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Torn of the Golden Country, which is maybe the best Xenoblade Chronicles game in my opinion, but a little light on story, unfortunately. That game looked pretty standard up front as well, but the actual implementation of a lot of its battle mechanics were actually changed pretty significantly, and it had a major impact on that game. So I, will reserve my judgment at this point, but usually it's a concern of mine when I look at Monolith Soft games and I can kind of tell what's happening. The big thing is that the Ouroboros mechanic is, which is like the big mech things in those games, seems to not be relevant in this title, and that was a mechanic of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I think was like the weakest combat mechanic. So I think replacing that with something else will be good. But the thing I've seen seems to be more of just like a special attack you can do. And so unless there's like some significant like element to that special attack, I would think that's probably, I don't want to say a downgrade, but it seems more like skimming something off the top and not really replacing it with anything meaningful. But, I'm saying this as somebody who has not been really looking at that game yet. I have not read that many impressions. I just kind of see stuff on Twitter occasionally, and generally have been scrolling past those tweets just to try to prevent myself from being overly spoiled by it. But yeah, I'm going to try to start that up this week, hopefully. I'm recording this podcast on a Saturday night, early Sunday morning. My sleep schedule is always botched, but in particular, it's a bit botched right now due to me coming back from Japan, right? But getting this podcast out of the way will give me tomorrow to kind of work on or play some games if I want to. So there's other things I need to do. I'm still like doing cleanup and stuff like that, right? So the next couple weeks are going to be busy. I'm also starting a new contract gig in my personal life, and then also my previous contract was asking for some more work from me, but I gotta kind of talk to them about that and figure out when they need to do that. So things are going to get a little busy here, but yeah, I'm looking forward to playing that, and hopefully it goes well. But one thing I did do when I was in Japan was I took my copy of Disaster Day of Crisis and took a picture with the Monolith Soft building, so that was fun. I did kind of see how close I could get to the Monolith Soft building, which you can get pretty close. I thought maybe it would be open to when I say building, they're on like one floor out of a giant tower. I was a little surprised to see that like there's like stores and stuff listed in the building, but I think I misunderstood, and that it was like there's two buildings with like very similar names, and then one has stores in it, and the other one does not have stores in it. It's just like the offices basically, but like the sign is like kind of right by them, and it's like they color scheme what's in what building, and like so it kind of looks like there's like a pizza shop in the what's it called. So I was like, is this something I can like go into the first floor or something like that, right? But I got closer to it and kind of like peeked in through the glass doors and stuff, and there's pretty much, as far as I could just tell, like a lobby and a elevator and then a security guard. So I was like, I'm not going in there with the security guard. But I was able to kind of peer through a window at some point, maybe a little suspiciously, and see the Monolith Soft placard on the wall. Cave is in the same building, by the way. Those shooter people, they're in that same building. So wow. Haagen-Dazsen as well. So it was a little bit of a creeper shot. I did take a picture, but I was a little too scared to post that particular picture on Twitter because it seemed maybe a little too creeper. So I kept that private. But I did post my picture on Twitter with me with Disaster Day of Crisis holding in front of the building. So that was kind of a fun thing. So anyways, not going to bore you guys with Monolith stuff. I'm going to talk about the things that we are excited for on this podcast. Dragon Quest Champions. So Dragon Quest Champions, if you don't know, this is that Battle Royale Dragon Quest game. I made a video about it if you'd like to check that out. However, it was in the beta period, so they were collecting feedback. I was going to provide feedback, but unfortunately it was not a multiple choice thing. It was a fill in the blank thing. I mean, there were multiple choice questions in there, but there were a lot of fields that were like, please type in information about your experience. And I got too scared and I ran away. But I went ahead and watched a little bit of the stream. It's all in Japanese. The game is not intended for an American or English release or US release or any other region, right? America and US. It is Japan only right now. But the kind of what I gathered from skimming through the stream was it seemed like about 50% of the player base was satisfied with the game, around 20% extremely satisfied, and then around 50% were unsatisfied, around 20% were very unsatisfied. I do not follow these things very often. I do not know what a good ratio is for succeeding, but it seemed like a lot of the concerns really seemed to come around how easy it was to A, get one shot by a group, or B, one shot other groups using specials and things like that. So again, I did not watch the whole thing. I did not watch it in a way that I could fully understand it. So there may be a lot more information. I may be misinterpreting some of that information, but I thought that was that was like a 50-50 split. Also, they were complaining that the drops were not good enough for the higher level drops, which is kind of funny because like they were feeding you free currency when you're playing that game. So curious how that would be when you're paying money kind of thing. So anyways, they didn't really give a time frame on when they plan to launch, but they are continuing with development and they said they will be improving it, hopefully. So we'll see what happens. I think, typically with these Square Enix projects, there's a very good chance they, go live for about a year. And then if they never really take off, Square Enix will go ahead and shut it down. I would not be surprised. I'd say if I had to bet money, Dragon Quest Champions will be one of those games. Another issue that kind of came up, or game that came out that maybe did not get received as super well, is Redfall. So if you don't know, this is a team-based shooter from the developers of Dishonored. I think it's a part of Bethesda's lineup, which is now purchased by Microsoft, so it is now a Microsoft Xbox game. Also on PC, though, as well. And the game launched to pretty poor reviews. The thing I always try to say, and I mean, kind of the main reason I'm bringing this up on this show is that, because of the modern day with live service games and updates, there's a chance that this game will be improved and that it may eventually turn into something good. Just because something launches poorly does not necessarily mean that it is not something that is going to recover, but it requires the companies behind those projects to be dedicated to fixing those and then also fixing them in the right ways, and the player base being open to fixing those things. However, it is interesting just in the sense of just like Microsoft continues to have these titles that come out that generally do not succeed. Hi-Fi Rush obviously being kind of the exception. My kitty in the background is meowing, so please enjoy that if you are. I'm not going to go get them right now. So yeah, but it is interesting to see Microsoft, continue to struggle in this way. And, I think there's been a lot of discussions about, where Microsoft's going, in their game space in general, what's important to them. Is the Xbox platform as a whole important to them, or games in general something that's important to them, or games as a service through Game Pass, things like that. And I think the reality is that, that there seems to be some kind of issue on a higher level that is causing all these games to maybe not turn out great, or it could just be a lot of bad rolls, right? That's not to say anybody's lazy, that anyone's greedy, or anything like that. That just means, I think the thing I always hear is that like every video game that comes out is a minor miracle. I'm sure a lot of people who care worked on these games, and it is actually very interesting to see like Phil Spencer's out there talking in general. They also another kind of side story to this is that they actually had their purchase of Activision blocked in the UK, so they're trying to figure out and navigate that whole thing. They had their financials recently, which they talked about the hardware sector of Xbox being down by 30%, I believe. But then at the same time, their service side of things is still kind of consistent. I think they had like a 3% growth or something like that. So it's kind of a weird time for Xbox. And I think, a lot of people have been waiting for Xbox to finally deliver some really hard-hitting games. And Hi-Fi Rush, is great, right? Or at least that's what I hear from people. But it is kind of like a budget release that came out, and it's like one game out of the whole thing. I would play Hi-Fi Rush over pretty much every first-party Sony single-player game, I will say. I would play the Hi-Fi Rush for that. But, that's my own personal opinion, and one game versus like a whole lineup of games that are kind of like in the mainstream to consider to be kind of quote masterpieces, right? So it's interesting to see that. And yeah, Phil was on a podcast with, I think, the Kind of Funny Xbox podcast or whatever. And like, I actually didn't watch the podcast, and I kind of ignored it initially, although I probably should watch it because I watched Kyle Boston's video about it. And yeah, I mean, Phil's pretty candid. Phil Spencer, the kind of CEO of gaming at Microsoft and Xbox, as a part of that. He's pretty candid about just like, oh, this is a big failure for them, and it's rough. It's rough from that side. I think a lot of people also kind of picked up on the fact that he kind of was saying that like making good games is not going to change their place in the market, which I don't necessarily know if most people agreed with. And I think, the thing that seems to always, not always, I should say, but seems to be a fairly decent consistent in the game industry is that like having good games is kind of number one, right? But Wii U had great games and did not succeed. So I don't want to say it is the main, like the only thing you need, right? But it is something that, it was an interesting comment to see from him. But it's like, it's a very, I don't know, it feels like somebody who is just like really frustrated, venting in a way that you just really want to expect out of like the CEO of Microsoft. But I think, look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm buddy with Phil or something like that, but he seems like a pretty candid guy. Or at least he's a lot more personal than like someone personable as like someone like a Jim Ryan. He seems like he is saying more than he should say as a CEO in regards to that stuff, but he seems pretty candid about it. So, anyways, at the end of the day, it doesn't really change Microsoft's position in that that they are still kind of putting out kind of a lot of titles that are being received as kind of middling titles. But again, Redfall could change in the future. I just thought it was worth bringing up just to remember that, because I think a lot of people are kind of writing it off right now, but there's something that could evolve in the future into something people like, because that is not something that happens. That is not a problem, as much a big a problem as it used to be. Anyways, so that stuff happened. Next here is an interesting story, actually, and I'm kind of in the process of, by the time you're hearing this, I might have purchased this. I don't know. We'll see. So we've been talking a little bit about Project Egg recently. Two big stories with them before was the fact that they are now allowing for kind of Dojin games to be uploaded to their service. If you don't know, Project Egg is like a service that emulates old PC games from the Japanese market. And then the other thing is that they're also putting Project Egg on the Switch as well. However, I think, to my understanding, Project Egg is more or less like a subscription service in Japan. I think they're maybe purchasing on individual titles and things like that. I don't know for sure, but I know it's like a part of a service kind of thing. They're not doing like releases of Project Egg things. However, this is an exception. So the Japanese PC, the X68000, is actually a really popular PC, but there's basically going to be a reprinting of 4 of those games in one disc, it sounds like, that are put in basically shells to run in Windows 10 and Windows 11. And it's about like $100, and it's like kind of like a lot of like a side-scrolling mech shooter kind of thing. There's like a 3D shooter thing, and then like this one kind of like Pocky and Rocky kind of looking isometric kind of shooter thing with like these really big sprites for the characters and things like that. So it looks pretty cool. It's about $100 right now. However, it seems like they're only selling 1,000 copies, I think, potentially, or at least there's only gonna be like 1,000 copies sold through Beep, maybe. But as far as I can tell, like once those 1,000 copies are sold, they aren't publishing any kind of digital version of this collection or anything like that. It seems to be kind of a very specific niche release. Last I checked, it is still in stock, so I think I might end up picking it up, but it doesn't release till winter 2023, so I'll have to like get it sent to like, what is it called, Tenso or something like that, and then try to remember that it's going to get shipped there so I don't lose it later. But I think I might end up doing that. I just got to sit down and do it. But yeah, so I'll post the link in the podcast description if that's something that you're interested in. I do not know how long that stuff will be available for, I will say. Like I said, it sounds like it's only going to be 1,000 copies before they sell out. But I have no real intention to get like an X68000 or do any X68000 emulation or anything like that. So picking up something that's just like a bundle of 4 games that generally looks like they're pretty accessible games overall, I think might be a good way for me to kind of introduce myself to that platform to some extent. So running old Japanese PCs is a very difficult thing. And, I have a PC-98 that I barely manage already on my own. So I don't think I'm looking to get another Japanese PC at this time. So this seems like a good avenue for that. I don't think they showed any box art or anything like that off, but it sounds like it's going to be like a CD or DVD ROM or something like that. So that's being sold through AC Mall JP. So I don't really know how Beep kind of comes into play with that, if that's like where they sell their stuff already. I know Beep has like an online presence for store stuff. I mean, they've sold kind of re-releases and stuff in the past as well. So, but like if you go in the store, I'm going to guess there will be some copies there too or something, as long as supplies last, right? So that's something that happened. On kind of like the weird Square Enix side of things, there was a really interesting story about Portopia serial murder case, which is basically, an old PC point-and-click adventure game where it was more like a text adventure where you like type in commands and things like that, right? And it was pretty iconic at the time. I think Yuji Horii might have been involved with that, which is the Dragon Quest guy. But it's kind of an iconic Japanese adventure game from the era, and I think the Famicom release is the big one. Because I was able to adapt that down to a console, and there's no keyboard, so you had to like put in different like text or like cursor commands on text things. So they had like, I think it's like pretty common in like LucasArts games too, where you like have the take button and you point something on screen and things like that. But the interesting thing about this is that it's not really a game release; it's more of a tech demo that Square Enix put out. And basically what it is like an AI-based serial murder or a version of the Portopia. It doesn't sound like it's the whole game. It sounds like it's a short chunk of that game. But the intention is that, previously with Portopia, if you need to type in a command, you have to kind of type it in exactly as the developers wanted to recognize it. And so what's happening here is they're trying to use AI as a way to adapt the information that the player gives them into actions that would be happening on screen. So you can say multiple ways, say how you want to pick something up or how to go somewhere. And then ideally the AI would be essentially translating that into, what is the most likely command. I have not tried this myself, but the general thought seems to be that it's not exactly, where it needs to be a video game. And I would assume Square Enix putting this out as a tech demo rather than as a video game is them saying, we also know this is not in a position where it needs to be put out as an actual video game. I saw some people getting pretty upset about this thing. And I think it's more about just the fact that it is the only so it has an English release technically here, but is the only official English release of Portopia. But again, it doesn't seem like it's the full game or anything like that. So I don't know, to me, it's just kind of well, this is a cool, interesting tech demo thing. But some people I think were kind of taking it as a game, even though Square Enix was pretty clear about this is a free thing that is not a video game. Please and thank you. So I did read through a 4Gamer interview about it. I mean, it was machine translated. 4Gamer is a Japanese website, I will say. But it seems like this project's been in the work for a while, and it's based off a 2020 version of AI stuff or AI, chat kind of stuff. And the other thing is that it sounds like that the AI database kind of thing for that stuff. I know this is very stupid way I'm talking about this because I don't know anything about how this stuff works, but the actually learning model kind of thing or something like that seems to be a compact one that's stored with the game. So it's not going to a cloud and trying to process it using a supercomputer or something like that. It's doing very limited things because they're just kind of storing the that actual interpretation on a local PC installation for you, basically. And it sounds like there's some differences between what's available for commercial use versus what's available for university and learning use and things like that. So they seem to be pretty aware that it is very limited right now, and that they plan to make it so in the future they can implement different, more up-to-date compact versions of that stuff. And sounds like they were trying to make it so it's something they can kind of take out and put in a new one fairly easily. Just to be clear, though, this is not the game writing its own script or anything like that. The text, as far as I'm aware, is kind of set text in the game. It's just interpreting how you actually put in information kind of thing. It sounds like they might be interested in actually having the character respond in more dynamic ways. But it sounds like there was a little bit of concern about people basically abusing it without like some kind of proper, ethics kind of thing, right? It's like kind of the weird thing with it right now. Like, do you want, this AI thing to start saying racist things, and then do you want to have that be, in a screenshot of the video game you release kind of thing, right? So it seems like that's kind of like the thing they're trying to avoid at this moment. Anyway, so I might check it out at some point, but we'll see. Getting Xenoblade out of the way is the first thing, but I think it's a pretty short tech demo, and probably isn't I need to like sit down and really beat. Just want to kind of like see how it works and things like that. But it sounds like something they're planning on trying to improve in the future as well. Curate is back. If you don't know, these are the guys who made Beat Replay and I forget the other game. It was like some massage game where you like helped like raise a office lady or something. I don't remember how what it was exactly, but these are the guys who have made kind of like pretty much erotic games, and some of them have actual like adult content, I believe, but then there's like a Switch release, and the Switch release always seems to be somewhat contentious. Sometimes it doesn't actually come out, sometimes it gets out and then removed and all these things. But they're trying yet again with a new game called Love on Leave, and this game actually seems pretty cool. I think most of the games in the past I feel like I've generally not been that interested in, because they always seem like a little shallow from a gameplay perspective. But this game's kind of interesting because it feels kind of like those My Summer Vacation games and like Attack of the Friday Monsters and things like that, but more from the stance of like, you're a dude who like is in your 30s or something like that, right? And like you have a dead end job, and you go back to your hometown or whatever, and your childhood friends are there, and you're there for like 2 weeks or whatever. And then in that time, like not only do you spend time going around and just spending time in like kind of the countryside and then playing mini games and things like that, but also you can romance your childhood friends from the time, basically. And being a Curate game, it is kind of I don't know if erotic is the right word, but there definitely is like ladies in bras and things like that. And like the Steam page does immediately say, hey, all these characters are 18 years old at the very least or something, right? So maybe he's not like 30, maybe, I don't know. It seems to imply that he like left for work 10 years ago. So I would think, at that point you're like your late 20s, early 30s. But I don't know. Who can say? The translation also seemed a little wonky at times. But this is coming out in May on the 17th, it looks like. It's a little budget in a lot of ways. I mean, the same way that most Curate games are, or at least look. I haven't played any of them, but the art's pretty nice, I think, generally. And it seems like it kind of leans into that kind of relaxing, laid-back atmosphere. And I generally heard that like Beat Replay actually had like a pretty good story, despite, the issues that came up with that game. And like the whole sexual harassment, massage drama basically around it. But I heard the story for itself for that was actually pretty good. But it's on Steam and Switch. I don't know if it is the same between those versions, or if the Switch version's more covered up, or if it's like a Steam patch you got to go download from a website or something like that. I did not see a DL site version at least listed on the main page. I know some of their games in the past have ended up on DLL site, especially after like the Switch version would get delisted or something like that. So maybe you'll end up there with more adult content. Maybe there is more adult content that I'm just not aware of, but it definitely leans into that. So I think, you need to be aware that you're going in, you're going to get like Sexy Time, the video game, My Summer Vacation Sexy Edition, right? So yeah, I don't know if I'll check it out, but it definitely is like the most appealing of their games that they have shown, in my opinion. Got another Square Enix update. The Million Arthur NFT game finally happened. So if you don't know, Square Enix been into NFTs for a while, but kind of their first NFT project, or at least the one that was probably the most notable for me, was they took their Million Arthur franchise, which is a franchise they had that was pretty popular for about 3 to 5 years, and then kind of died off. But it's a bunch of mobile games and things like that. But they launched an NFT program based around the web series that was with Million Arthur, because Million Arthur had a really popular web series of like 4-coma style comic videos, I guess you could say. They sold them on like a Blu-ray and things like that. And like the characters are all these like super deformed version, all the characters in the game and stuff like that. And it's very crude and all that stuff. It was actually pretty popular at the time. But anyway, so they launched this NFT thing, and then like, what can you do with NFTs is always the big question with NFTs, but they said they would try to make a video game around it, and they finally did make a video game around Million Arthur NFTs, but it is kind of weird because it is a auto RPG. So basically you like have a party of characters and they go do dungeons, and but it sounds like the NFT part of it is largely optional. So it seems like they want to make sure that people can play that game, whether they're involved with NFTs or not. I don't want to make any judgments about the quality of it per se, because, you know, you could sit there and look at it and say, okay, it's like an auto RPG like a lot of these NFT games are. But there are a lot of video games out there that are more like auto RPGs or auto clickers or things like that. And I'm not going to sit there and disparage those video games for what they are, right? I think it's just easier for people to make fun of these because it is NFT based in a lot of ways. But it's kind of a goofy concept because you go and do these dungeon runs, and then during those dungeon runs, you collect sushi. And then for some reason, those sushi end up creating pants. And then it seems like you can sell those pants for various currencies, where you can buy stamps and stickers, and then you can make your own little stamp or sticker, and maybe you can turn them into NFTs. I don't know. And create them using the kind of cute Million Arthur web series style kind of thing. So this is a line-based NFT program. So I assume the game itself is a line-based game as well. If you don't know, line is a Japanese, well, I guess it's in the bigger Asia region as well, but Japan is the one I'm most familiar with when it comes to line. But it's a big chat app. And it has various things integrated into it, including NFTs through Line. And so they also have games as well. So it kind of combined through there. 4Gamer had some impressions up about it, again, through machine translation. So, you know, not a ton that, you know, I can sit there and say confidently with, but it seemed like really what they were trying to say in their preview piece or look at the game is basically, you know, it is fine for what it is kind of thing. That like a lot of these, like especially like first looks at games, I feel like in Japanese coverage don't get a lot of like quantitative, like is it good or bad kind of thing, right? But they basically seem to be recommending it to people who are fans of that Million Arthur web series and just saying like, hey, it's a nostalgic look back at that. And there seems to be some like little story bits and things like that they look original to me as somebody who's watched those like NFT or not NFT, the web series in the past. But, you know, I really kind of look at it and, you know, I think the thing for me personally is that, you know, I'm always open for NFTs to prove their worth, but I have very little confidence in what NFTs are and what their worth is at this point in time, at the very least. And this game does not improve that feeling at all. From a Million Arthur perspective, you know, it is kind of cute, right? It has a very like Tomodachi Life kind of feel to it, or Tomodachi, what is it called? Mitomo kind of feel to it in terms of like, you know, you can make little scenes and with stickers and stamps and things like that. And that's like really cute, right? And like you can say, well, what's the value in creating that? And it's like more of just like something that's cute and fun to share, right? And Million Arthur has a cute style to it kind of thing. But like, what is the value of that? You know, Mitomo didn't even really figure that out, right? So it is something that I don't really know what like the end game of it is. And then when you start wrapping it into the NFT story of, you know, investment kind of thing, I don't know how, you know, that becomes a part of this equation and like how you build value through playing Million Arthur. You know, assuming that every NFT game needs to be based around building value, but that seems to be the big, you know, push that people had with NFT games, is that the NFT you had would build value and then you could resell it kind of thing. So I just don't see how that happens here. But, you know, a lot of NFT games in general, I think, are on a budget right now. And, you know, I think that they are sticking with these more simple game styles. And, you know, I think the choices they made with Million Arthur from an aesthetics perspective really worked out well for them. It is like kind of like little chibi sprite art, but it like kind of has a very like Game Gear sprite look to it in a lot of ways that I think kind of makes it like stand out a little bit, maybe along the lines of like those Final Fantasy pixel games that came out, right? But it is, you know, something that just seems like an auto, well, I don't want to say just seems like an auto RPG, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of interactivity with it. It seems more of like a resource management kind of thing to build stickers, essentially. So there's quite a few videos out there if you want to go check it out. They're out there and around. People have been playing it, it seems like. They seem to be floating around a few thousand views for each of those videos kind of thing. So don't think it's the biggest thing in the world, but maybe the hardcore Million Arthur fans are checking it out. I actually got a PlayStation VR when I was in Japan, which I need to double check, but I would think that Million Arthur VR thing is something you can still get. And I think it was on PSVR as well. So gotta check that out. Yeah, it's like $70, man. Pretty affordable for a PSVR 1. I feel like. And then, getting it from Japan, it's like in great condition. I could not get the box back though, unfortunately. So, and the last story here is about, I don't think we talked about this. This is a Monster Hunter story, actually. Monster Hunter Now. This is a location-based Monster Hunter game. We just got done talking about, the Sengoku, or maybe not, like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms game. I don't remember what that game's called. The Koei Tecmo Muso series thing, right? They have like a location-based game that they were doing, and I kind of had interest in that, but as a Japan-only one. But Capcom, pretty shortly after that, announced a Monster Hunter one. This is in partnership with Niantic. I don't know if all these are like things that Niantic are involved with. I know Niantic's involved with Pikmin, Pokemon Go, whatever their original game was, and now this Monster Hunter thing too. So I don't know if there's other companies making these things. I mean, I'm sure somebody's trying, but I don't know if there's any like larger location-based games that are successful that are not, alongside Niantic. But anyways, so this is a Monster Hunter-based one, and, I'll be honest with you, I don't really know a lot about this, but it looked pretty cool, and it's also coming out in English, so it is like a different thing from Pokemon Go and Pikmin Bloom. I don't know how many of these kind of things came out, but at least like the Dragon Quest Walk and Muso one are not necessarily likely going to come out here, unfortunately. So this is probably the first one that I have I don't want to say heavily considered, but have considered playing. There's a closed beta test signups right now, but it looks pretty neat visually at the very least. I don't know gameplay-wise what's going on there, but it seems to basically be, you go to a location, there's a monster there, and you get kind of put in an arena where you can fight that monster kind of thing. But it's a touchscreen-based game. I'm going to guess it's not going to be nearly as intense as Monster Hunter. I was reading another 4Gamer article, and it was definitely in that Japanese way of saying, like, oh, if you are somebody who's been interested in Monster Hunter, but it's been too hard for you to get into it, here's the perfect way to enjoy Monster Hunter. I feel like it's like a very Japanese, like, article thing that I've noticed over the years, is that, like, it's like, oh, if you are interested in these things, but also you found them too intimidating, here's a more simplified version of it. Like, I think I mentioned a few weeks ago, like the Dragon Quest Champions preview I was reading, and some guy was like, yeah, this is a great game if you have a child on your lap. Like, if you're watching a child, this game is way more laid back than most Battle Royale games on mobile. And then he's like, later on, he's like, I don't have a child. This is the scenario I thought up. But I do like that kind of looking for scenarios where things work. And like Babylon's Fall had a thing where they're like, oh, this is a great hack and slash game for people who don't typically play hack and slash games. So I do kind of like that. Anyways, that being said, it looks kind of neat. I don't know if I'll end up playing it, but I am still in the market of playing a location-based game. I think like something Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest based would be probably the most likely thing, or at least most likely thing to happen. But Dragon Quest did happen and didn't come out here, so maybe like a Final Fantasy one. But I also think that Monster Hunter maybe seems reasonable enough. I kind of appreciate Monster Hunter as a whole a little bit. I just wouldn't say I'm like a Monster Hunter fan. So I'll kind of watch it from afar. I don't think I'll participate in the closed beta test or anything like that, but I might give it a look at just to try it. Because I would like to play one of these style of games, but Pokemon Go isn't really for me. Pikmin Bloom seems like it could be all right. Pikmin Bloom probably is the one that would like work best for me from like a exercise sense kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll consider it. Maybe I won't. Maybe I won't do it. That's the thing. Most of these games we talk about on here, I'm like, this is interesting. Good chance I'm never going to play this, but, this is interesting. Million Arthur NFT game. Going to keep watching to see if there's any updates there, but probably will never play it. So, anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks, you guys, for coming. Appreciate it. So we'll be back on normal podcast schedule for now. And like I said, I'll probably try to do some kind of like Japanese trip stream just to kind of go through that. I'm going to reorganize it in a different way this time around rather than doing it chronologically. I think I'll just kind of organize things into categories and talk about it that way. Though I'm sure stuff will pop up as they come up. Otherwise, though, that will be it. Oh, just as a heads up, ShineCon, I did go ahead and do that panel presentation. It was pretty small. No one really showed up. And honestly, because I came back from Japan, it was kind of just like a worse version of the Portland one in terms of delivery, or maybe more conversational, I guess, maybe. I wasn't like as in the moment of like, this is the thing I need to say. I was just kind of like, rambling on kind of thing. So I did not record it, and I don't really think you guys missed too much of me not recording it. So, but that did happen at ShineCon this week in Las Vegas. So If you missed it, no biggie. Just go watch my Portland Retro Game Expo one. Not Portland Retro Game Expo, sorry. KomoriCon one from Portland late last year. So I think that's on the... Is that on? I don't know if that's on the One Controller Port channel or the One Controller Plus channel. So that's why you go to onecontroller.com and you search panels, and then it'll show up there. And then you'll get pointed to whatever channel it's on. That's then the problem with like the channel split stuff and like all my old content being on old channels is like that, like certain types of content that are similar are like spread across different channels now, which is frustrating. But you know, it's not like I can go back and just like re-upload like, you know, 500 plus old videos and streams on the new or the like the secondary channel now. So but that's gonna be it. Thank you guys for coming so much and so much. And I'll talk to you guys next week, hopefully having played some Xenoblade Chronicles Future Redeemed. Bye.